All right, you guys, welcome back to our second to last session, Healing Through Spirituality and Spiritual Connection. So, in this session, we have three different OM patients, and they are Rabbi Laura Metzger, Reagan Lambert, and Katie Kimmel. And all of them, as you're going to see through their stories and through how they share and just kind of the things that they are able to hopefully kind of draw some connections for, all of them are I guess just they practice in a spiritual way, like religiously, or their spiritual practices all look different. So just keep that in mind. Our hope is to be able to convey that there's really no wrong answer here. If you find meaning and you find connection in some level of spirituality or some religious practices, that is something that is valuable and that you definitely have reason to hold on to throughout your diagnosis. So let me go ahead and introduce our speakers before we bring them up on live. First up, we have Rabbi Laura Metzger, and she is largely retired now, and she's provided spiritual leadership, pastoral care, counseling, and education in a variety of settings, including the synagogue, the hospital, long-term care facility, and religious school. Rabbi Metzger is well known in Louisville as a vibrant teacher, particularly in the interreligious dialogue. Before entering the rabbinate, and I hope I'm saying that right, Rabbi Metzger had an extensive career in marketing and advertising with some of the world's leading businesses, among them Princess Cruises and Yum Brands. Rabbi will be joined by Reagan Lambert and Katie Kimmel. Reagan Lambert was hired by Tom Landry in 1990 and began a 30-year career as the director of the Austin Central Texas Hill Country Fellowship of Christian Athletes, or the FCA. The Austin Central Texas Hill Country FCA covers 14 counties and 220 plus middle schools, high schools, colleges, and universities. He retired in June 2020. He is also an OM patient who recently shared his story on the I Believe podcast, episode 53, if you'd like to go and hear more of his story there. And of course, you'll hear a little bit of a synopsis or a summarized story here today. And Katie was actually a speaker that we had last year, and she is an MA and an LCPC. And she is going to be discussing some insights on spirituality from her perspective. And she is also an ocular melanoma survivor and a clinical therapist with over 15 years of experience. She believes the greatest outcomes come from the most challenging circumstances, and that as adults, we can transform these experiences and challenges into profound learning. Her research focus in her clinical studies has largely been on human flourishing, specifically eudaimonia, following tragic life experiences. Katie is also an instructor of psychology at the North Idaho College and resides in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, with her two children, where she works as a trauma therapist. As a survivor, she volunteers as an advocate and fundraises for ocular melanoma patients. Her purpose is to assist her fellow survivors in living their absolute best and most meaningful lives. So let's go ahead and bring all of our panelists up on the screen so we can welcome them today. Thank you all for being here.
Good morning.
It's good to be.
Good morning. Okay, so I think what we're going to have everybody do is we're going to kind of take some turns, and I'm going to have you guys, if you can, just share briefly anything that you would like to speak to for maybe 8 to 10 minutes roughly. And then we can go through a few questions that I have for you guys specifically. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go in order of who I see first. And actually, I think this is actually alphabetical order if I can do my ABCs. So Rabbi, I'm going to have you go first. And then we're going to bring Katie and Reagan back down off the screen. And then we'll just have one person talking at a time. And then Rabbi, I can stay on with you if you'd like, and we can just have a chat, or I'll just let you go and present. It's up to you.
I think, as I said to you yesterday, we'll go with the flow.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I will be here in the background, but I'm going to go away for a minute, and I'll just let you kind of talk briefly about your story and what you want to share today.
Excellent. Life never goes according to plan, as you all know. Our elderly dog, he's 17, he just had a big messy accident and fell into it. So a very quick dog bath later, here I am, a bit disheveled and damp. And if that doesn't distract from any of my own woes, I wonder what else might. It has been quite a week, a work overload, relentless pain, scanxiety, all stuff you know all too well. But in my view, stress is not a good place to hang out, and fear is not a good companion. So I try not to stay there. Some of the methods in my life are probably familiar to you. In fact, we've been discussing some of them already this morning. Breathing, distraction, choosing who we spend time with. And then there's the frivolous reading, crossword puzzles, and for me, planning my garden and sketching whenever I can. Along with, and perhaps even more important than all of these, is what I think of as my safe place. I don't have a name for it yet. Maybe by the end of today. As you know, my title, Rabbi, I am steeped in Jewish life, in the language and the learning and the tradition. It's what I do. It's what I teach, and it's what I live. So what I'm going to say is from that language and that tradition, learned there, but I believe that it has wisdom that transcends a religion, a language, a people. And I promise I'm not in Hebrew. I'm going to stay with English. There is a teaching in Judaism that one should say 100 blessings a day. That sounds like a lot of praying. And indeed, it can be. But I think there are some things in here that are not only about prayer. 100 is a nice number, but don't really sit there and count. Okay, I said one, I said two, I said I've got a whole lot more to go. No, it's really more a concept. So I want to tell you, when I say the word blessing, to me, it is an expression of, wow, or, oh my goodness, or even, ah, thank you. Wow, that's glorious. Or, oh my gosh, that's sad. That was delicious. That was so, or brilliant, or puzzling beyond understanding. And then, and this is the most important part, recognizing the experience in the moment. The great 20th century rabbi, scholar, social justice activist, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, used the phrase radical amazement, being in awe and knowing it, that we have the ability to know what we're experiencing and give words to what we're, or if not words, sounds. And that's what I mean by blessing. Certainly in a book, Judaism offers so many blessings. Here are a few. On rising in the morning, gratitude for the return of awareness. On leaving the bathroom, gratitude that the body works. On putting on your shoes, on new clothes. Before eating and drinking, in gratitude and in recognition that these are both pleasures and the first fruit of the season or something you've never tasted before. It's a blessing. On seeing something beautiful, there's a blessing. On witnessing something intense like a storm, there's a blessing. On seeing a wise person or something really peculiar. Now, these aren't limited to religious ideas. Imagine what it means to find blessing popping up throughout the most ordinary day. You wake up and you're still sit up. You're able to move your limbs. You smell coffee and toast. And isn't toast one of the yummiest aromas around? And the sun is shining, or it's not. It's snowing out there, or it's not. The kids are not fighting. Dream on. Or the kids have grown and have kids of their own. And here's wow in it. I know that. I am aware. I'm experiencing it all day long. So it's taken me many years to make this my life. It actually began with a decision long ago, long before I became a rabbi. I decided to stop being grouchy. That is a project of a few years. And it began with the commitment, when the alarm went off in the morning, to turn it off and take 1 minute to feel how good it felt to lie there under the blanket. Well, that grew and that grew and that grew. And now I am so grateful that this is how I live my life. And so I invite you too, as we continue in this dialogue, to grab a gratitude, a cup of tea in a beautiful cup, a safe surrounding, the weather on the other side of the window, thank heaven. For many years, I was the rabbi for a Jewish nursing home, and I learned every day when I wake up, it's a day. And with that, let's move to the next part of this, Danae.
Oh, I love that. And that really, I mean, I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday during our tech check, but it really brings to light, I think, some just the ways that our minds can go to make meaning, to make connection. And it doesn't have to be defined by a specific religion for it to be meaningful. And for the spiritual, connection that happens. And I know that you've said spirituality is not really a word in your vocabulary, but it is in mine. And so I think for me, one of my favorite mantras, I guess is what it is to say, like, I'm here today and I'm going to be here tomorrow, because I know I'm here today, and I'm trusting that tomorrow will happen. And just that little mantra of like, okay, it helps me be more present and more grateful for the day, and to be more, in tune with what's actually happening on the day to day. So let's go ahead and bring, who's up next? Let's go ahead and bring Katie up next, if that's okay.
Hi.
Hi, Katie.
How are you?
So I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, and I can't believe that you're already active and after your surgery, and I think you're amazing.
Well, thank you. I feel pretty good. I've had, some waves. I think anyone who's had their eye enucleated can relate to, like, there's kind of a period of time where you just have to adjust. And I didn't think I'd have to adjust as much, since I was already blind in one eye, and I was mistaken. I still had some adjusting to do. But it's been generally better than I thought it would be. So I'm grateful for that. So can you tell us just briefly a little bit about your story, like, just so that we can recap a little bit of your diagnosis, and then kind of maybe where you were in your life spiritually? Because I know you and I kind of have a little bit of a similar experience there, but also you had kind of redefined your spirituality in some ways before your diagnosis, where I have been redefining it in the midst of my diagnosis. So I feel like there's some differences there for sure.
Yes. So I was diagnosed about 5 years ago, and I was diagnosed with the most aggressive form of ocular melanoma. So I feel really, really lucky to be on this panel today. So I am free of metastasis, and I feel very humbled to be on this panel, because I don't really think of myself as someone who is necessarily spiritual or religious. And so I gave this a lot of thought. And the rabbi was so eloquent in her speaking, so it's difficult to follow up after her. But just a little bit of history. So I was raised in Utah as a Mormon, and my family, shortly after became Catholic. So I went to Gonzaga to get my clinical degree and become a therapist. And I think that I'm probably I think that probably a lot of people can relate to having some spiritual religious crises in their lives and having to, like Danae said, redefine their spirituality, their religion. And I was doing my internship with children who had been sexually abused. And that was around the time that there was the controversy in the Catholic Church with the priests who had been abusing children. And so that's, I think, when I had a spiritual crisis and decided that I needed to rethink my own spirituality or religion. So I think that when I think of spirituality, I don't necessarily know that I believe in any sort of deity or worship any deity, but if there is a God, my guess is that God would want me to be a servant to people. And I think that the best way to do that is to help the people who are most in need. And so I specialize in trauma. And the introduction was a bit dated because I've been a therapist for a little over 20 years now. So I work with individuals, mostly adults, who have experienced severe psychological trauma. And I think that what comes closest to a spiritual breakthrough for me is listening, having the honor to hear people's tragic stories. And I think that what comes the closest to feeling spiritual for me is watching my clients have breakthroughs and seeing them heal from what they've been through. And I just feel really privileged to be able to work with individuals who have had really, really difficult life experiences. So as far as spirituality goes, I think my definition is a servant to others, and I absolutely love what I do. So I'm also a PhD student, and like Danae said, my focus is human flourishing, and I don't want to focus on post-traumatic symptoms. I want to focus on post-traumatic growth. So what happens with individuals who go through tragedy in their lives and rather than become depressed and weak, and I think our Western model of medicine is post-traumatic stress and focusing on the symptoms that come from trauma instead of the amazing growth that is possible. So my research is with our ocular melanoma population, and what I've learned from them has been amazing. And one of the commonalities that they all had, those who had experienced post-traumatic growth, is some sort of spirituality, some sort of belief system. And interestingly enough, when I talk about my own religious crisis, I think when I was diagnosed, I really had a lot of questions. And I was honestly preparing for my death, so I wanted to do some research. And what resonated most with me was Buddhist principle. And I started studying Buddhism and really, really connected and kind of found a belief system, which was really comforting to me because I had spent a lot of my life, honestly, with a lot of questions and wanting to understand and wanting to be part of something and wanting to have a larger belief system. So Buddhism is what resonated with me, and I know that a lot of individuals find peace in meditation and mindfulness and like the rabbi was talking about, gratitude. um, and being grateful for every moment. And I think that's what I've learned throughout this journey was just being grateful for the little things and for my friends and my family. So I was lucky enough, and my mom is probably watching right now. I have a great family. So I was lucky enough to be raised in a home where my mom allowed me to explore a different belief system and think for myself. And I know not a lot of people have that opportunity. I mean, I grew up in a place where you're expected to be a certain religion and it's part of the culture. And there's a lot of backlash if you're not part of that. So just really grateful that I have the family and the mom that I do who let me really just explore my own belief system. So, yes, that's a little bit of my journey.
Wonderful. Katie, thank you so much for sharing. And I love what you talked about, as well as like with your research, how one of the common threads of the people who have had post-traumatic growth through this diagnosis specifically is that they have been able to kind of hold on to some kind of a spiritual practice. And like you said, that looks different for everyone. For some people, it's going to be meditation. For some people, it's going to be really diving into religious practices, maybe reading your Bible or reading some kind of a scriptural text that brings you comfort and brings you peace. And I think one of the biggest things for me that I'm realizing is that it's not even necessarily just the practices. Sometimes it's the belief. It's that belief and that level of belief and faith in something greater than ourselves, right? Something bigger than just our current circumstances that helps us, I guess, just kind of believe that there's some kind of a purpose to life as we know it in this moment, and that the circumstance really doesn't change that. There's still a big purpose. There's still I guess, a good ending, whether that ending happens the way we expect it to or not. And I think that's been really powerful for me. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to, so I think if anything, I bring a little bit of real life and authenticity to whenever I talk about my journey. So one of the things that I found as part of this healing process is grieving is probably one of the most important processes to go through. And grieving is messy and it's not always, in very distinct stages. It can look different for everybody. And for me, it was 4 years later, it was delayed grief. And when I found out that I had cancer, I was like, all right, what can I accomplish next? I'll get my doctorate, and kind of dove in head first. And then 4 years later, actually came to terms with and dealt with my diagnosis. So I think most people believe that it's this very neat process of stages and we're supposed to be strong and look a certain way. And I just really want to emphasize that human beings were meant to be flawed. And there's nothing neat and there's really nothing structured about this grieving process. For me, it was, there were some real ugly times for me. And there were some amazing times for me. And I have my support system, my family, and my friends. And I lost friends along the way. But I think we're human, and part of being human and growing is changing and learning and messing up, making a lot of mistakes along the way. And I think unless you have had the opportunity to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, I don't know that it's possible to grow spiritually. So.
Okay, there we go. Well, Katie, thank you so much for sharing. And before we bring everybody back together, I'm actually going to bring Reagan back up, and we're going to let him kind of share a little bit of his insights and kind of his journey and his process. So let's go ahead and bring Reagan back up. Hello.
Morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Of course.
So Reagan, do you want to just briefly just kind of cover a little of your story? But I really want you to just, if you can, just focus in on the things that have helped you, that are maybe part of your spiritual practice or your belief system that have really grounded you in this diagnosis.
Sure. Uh, 2016, it happened as an adult. So I was 62 years old and found out about the cancer and the tumor through a regular visit with my optometrist. And when I was on the podcast with you earlier, you went through all the details of it, but basically found out about the tumor, decided to go to Philadelphia. I live in Texas, decided to go to Philadelphia to Dr. Shields for treatment. And so for 5 years, we went back and forth to Philly and Dr. Sato and Dr. Shields. And the tumor was small and really on the outside of, or further away from the nerve. And so it was able to be killed through the plaque process. And I didn't lose any vision. And the prognosis is like we all have. I'm getting scans now once a year and to look for the metastasis, but nothing has happened with the tumor coming back. And so again, like everyone else, and it doesn't have to be, to me, it's not cancer. I mean, I've had asthma my entire life. When I 63 years old, during a regular physical, found out I had blood sugar problems, and then found out I was a type 1 diabetic. I was not overweight. I didn't have any other symptoms except that my pancreas decided to stop producing insulin. And so now I'm on a pump and have to take mealtime insulin and have to watch it all the time and have to change it out. And it's part of my life now. So the cancer to me it's very scary. And I'd never heard of, as we talked about, I'd never heard of ocular melanoma until it happened. But in my life, it's just been another obstacle or hurdle to deal with. As far as my faith goes, I was raised in a Christian home. I tell people as a joke that I had a drug problem growing up, that my mother and dad drugged me to church every time the doors were open. And that was really true. But at some point in time, you make, or at least I did, I made the decision that the faith that I saw in my parents and grandparents was going to be my faith. And I wasn't coerced into it. They didn't force me into it. It was a decision that I made at an early age, probably 10 years old. And I'm 67. So for 57 years, this faith has been a part of my life, and I can't separate it. I'm not a ocular melanoma survivor that happens to be a Christian. In my mind, I'm a Christian who happens to have had eye cancer and diabetes and asthma. And it's just part of life. If we're above ground, we're going to be dealing with things in our lives, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And so I'm happy that I'm above ground, and I'm happy that I have the opportunity to do this with you. It's one of the other things we talked about, that the things that happened to me in my life and in the ministry that I was in, I truly believe are not, excuse me, always about me. They're about my ability to relate and maybe minister to other people. It's not something I would choose. And we talked about the lady that founded Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And before she founded that, she had no desire to get involved in that organization. It wasn't until one of her children was killed by a drunk driver that she decided to start MAD. But just look at what has come out of that nationally, maybe even internationally, how she's been able to impact people. And we haven't eradicated drunk driving, but they've had a lot to do with maybe reducing it. And so the idea that me having ocular melanoma is just about poor old me, I'm not going to be able to deal with that, and I'm going to go into a cave or a cocoon and I'm not going to be able to deal with life that never entered my mind. And I really wanted, and that's, I told you that you're you're a hero in my mind, because you haven't had it that long. You've lost your eye. You've dealt with the highs and lows, but yet you're in the fight, and that's, to me, that's pretty cool. And I want to be in the fight for as long as I have the opportunity to fight. Also, uh, the Old and New Testament in the Bible are filled with things, and I could talk about them all day, but I only have a certain amount of time. But in the Old Testament, the Bible talks about not fearing, not to be afraid. It talks about being strong and courageous. And now we can't do this by ourselves, but in my uh, spiritual walk, God and His Word and His people have been there for me through everything, whether it was the loss of a job or deciding whether to go into ministry or deciding who the heck am I going to get to deal with my ocular melanoma? Am I going to go to MD Anderson, which is 2.5 hours from where I live, or am I going to go to Philadelphia? And how that all came about, I think I explained it all, but it was all through prayer. It was all through God opening up doors and me walking through them. And like both ladies before me, the support system that you have is huge, and mine is no different. I have a group of people that were with me in ministry. I have people that I've known my whole life. I have former pastors, former uh, people that I was in church with, different churches, and they're all there for you, and they all help you not to fear, and they all help me to be strong and courageous. And I also know that this life that we have is not guaranteed. I have today, but the Bible's pretty clear that I'm not guaranteed tomorrow, and I don't believe any of us are. And so I need to do what I can do today, and that's all I'm responsible for. And I'm just thankful to you, Danae, and to the whole Current site for the opportunity that you presented us, but also how people that are going through this in the beginning stages. I didn't have this, and I didn't know about you guys, but it's a real blessing to me. And however I can help you in the future, or however I can reach out to any person that's had it or is experiencing problems, I'm happy to do it. And thank you for what you're doing. As I said, you're a hero to me for being in the fight.
Thank you so much for being here with us again. And I know we have your podcast episode up. And so, like I said, episode 53, you guys can tune in and you can hear more of Reagan's story directly. And he does talk quite a bit about his journey and just the things that were circumstances that led to all of the things that have happened in his diagnosis. And it's pretty neat to listen to. So thank you guys all for being here. I want to just kind of recap as we bring you guys all back on screen and just kind of share what I took away from the majority of all of your different, insights. So the first thing that I got is, let's look for those wow moments, as Rabbi Laura said. And those wow moments, they don't have to be these big things in our life. They don't have to be gigantic, significant events. They can be as simple as holding a cup of tea and feeling grateful for that warm cup of tea in your hands that's keeping your fingers cold or warm because you were cold and maybe you were outside at somebody's soccer game like me. I was very cold. It was so cold, you guys. It's Arizona. I don't know what's wrong. Also, side note, I just realized I said we were going to go alphabetical order, and then I didn't go alphabetical order because ABC's has K first. So I apologize.
I should
if
have been
anybody
first,
corrected.
I think.
Oh, you think you should have been first? R goes first?
Well,
I don't know.
L, M,
Oh, that's true. By
W.
last name. That's true. If we were going by last name, you would have been first. But anyway, I digress.
It worked.
But those pockets of joy, those wow moments, everybody calls them something different, right? But just finding those little things that you can focus on, that you can really sit with. I have a life coach that I had who he said, like, take a mental picture. Like when something good happens, like take a mental picture and capture that moment. Like don't stress about capturing it on your phone with your, capturing a picture. But just capture it and really just like soak it in, because those moments are the things that I think really make life worth living. I think Brene Brown says there's twinkle lights, and that the twinkle lights are really like the definition or the essence of joy. And the twinkle lights they're not big, flashy, stage lights. They're just twinkles. They're little things that over time build up and they create this beautiful, picturesque kind of an environment, like Christmas tree lights or, like those kinds of lights, those kinds of little lights. And they all come together to really, I think, make life more meaningful. So that was my first takeaway, is those pockets of joy, those wow moments. The second thing is, like Katie mentioned, finding ways that you can be of service. That can really, as part of a kind of a spiritual background, or just growing up in a place where you maybe have experienced times and opportunities where you've had to serve in your religious community, and then translating that desire to serve from not just your religious community, but to the world around you. And I think Reagan has also done this as well, where you look for, okay, this is my experience. How can I go out and how can I make this better for somebody else? Um, and then what Reagan had mentioned, I think was really important, was making something meaningful and just really assigning purpose to what are you going through right now, and dictating, through your own definition, really assigning purpose to what is happening in your life. And instead of letting that circumstance define you, you define how it looks moving forward. And I think that's so powerful. So I did want to ask you guys, just as a general, like kind of one by one question. And before I ask these questions, I am going to just pose to the audience, for those of you listening, if you guys have any practices that you feel have helped you in finding meaning, if you can drop those in the chat, and I will gladly share some of those on our live stream. If you guys have any of those that you'd like to share with the audience, so just things that have been meaningful and helpful to you, whether it's spiritual and religious practices or otherwise. So go ahead and drop those in the chat. I'll come back to those in a few minutes. But my first question to you guys, and I'll start with Rabbi Laura, is, over time with your diagnosis, has anything in the way that you practice, the way that you have kind of made sense of the world, has anything changed that you attribute kind of as being like that shift caused by your diagnosis?
The piece of my life that makes that hard to answer is so much changed at the same time. So most of my work life was going away because of closing agencies and such. And my daughter grew up and went away. And there were so many things changing that it's hard to say which was influencing which. But I would say on the whole, the most profound difference is I don't take everything so seriously now.
I love that. That's so
now,
good.
it might sound opposite. It might sound backwards. But when you know that life is going to end and you accept that, and as I said, I worked in a nursing home. I know life is going to end. But each little thing isn't so important anymore. So I'm actually a lot calmer and funnier as a human being than I was before.
I love that. Thank you. Katie, what about you? Do you feel like this diagnosis, and I know you kind of alluded to, you had this delayed period of grief, of like kind of really dealing with and grieving life before your diagnosis to currently, and it happened for you 4 years later. And like you said, grief doesn't have a timeline. We all experience it in different ways and at different times. But what do you feel like has been your experience?
What didn't change when I was diagnosed? Everything, my world was turned upside down, and it was horrifying. It was honestly, it felt like I was in a nightmare when I was first diagnosed. But after going through this grieving process and really, really paying attention to the things that matter and trying to be my most authentic self, I just really, really wanted to help people. That's all I've ever really wanted to do. And I wanted to be really good at that. And so I think that my career path is my form of spirituality. And I think that I just really I remember thinking every single person I come in contact with, I want to make some sort of difference in their good difference, even if it's little, every person that I come into contact with. So, my clients, hopefully I'm making a big difference in their lives. But even when I go through the McDonald's drive-through, I want to make sure that I'm complimenting the McDonald's worker, and that I am just grateful for everybody, and whether I know them or not. So yeah, I think that when we talk about what changes, everything changes.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Everything
Such a
changes.
good point. And I like what you said about just doing something every day to be intentionally just trying to make a small difference in anyone and everyone's life that you come in contact with. And I feel like that can make a really big difference in the way that you carry yourself as a human being. Because how many times are we driving, right? We're just driving and somebody's honking and somebody's flipping somebody off out the window, and it's just like, kind of like what Rabbi said, like, don't take it so seriously. Like, did you know I'm blind on one side? I'm driving and you're mad at me, but like, you don't know I'm blind. So like, you probably wouldn't want to be driving next to me anyway. Did you know that? You also probably would have a little more compassion for my driving and me being slow. Were you aware of what was actually going on the other side of the window? But I think just that idea that anything that we do, big or small, can leave an imprint on the world around us. I think that's really, for me, that's impactful, and that's helpful. And that makes me, I think, take more care in how I carry myself in public places, in interactions with friends. And I try to be really, really more calm with my children, but my children are little and life is hard sometimes. So full disclosure, I'm not a perfect mom. Anyway, okay. So Reagan, what about you? What do you feel like, has anything changed, or do you feel like this is all just kind of really fit into, I think I like what you said about how you're not I think I'm going to get it backwards. You're not an ocular melanoma patient who's a Christian. You're a Christian who happens to have ocular melanoma. I thought that was really, really unique.
Right. And I got that from the ministry that I was in, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So we had everything was the sports vernacular. So we used to say that I'm not a baseball player who happens to be a Christian. I'm a Christian who happens to play baseball. And I'm sorry, I really believe that I can't separate who I am from what I do. And
Mm-hmm.
people that would want me as a baseball player to check my faith at the door when I walk in the locker room, I just wasn't able to do that. And I don't think that's right. We're not supposed we're not supposed to leave that part of our lives out, I don't think. Anyway,
Yeah, I love that.
what changed? What changed besides the crazy, scary part of possibly losing your eye and it, excuse me, metastasizing to liver and lungs and those kind of things. Outside of that, uh, the only thing that changed for me, and we talked about this earlier, is just my ability, I think, to be more empathetic towards others, and also the desire to pay things forward to other people too, because like I said, I've had asthma, I had diabetes, but nobody really freaked out when I got those. But when I told them about this eye tumor, most people were pretty freaked out about it, like I was, because I didn't know about it, and they'd never heard of that. They thought melanoma was on your skin, and that's what I thought as well. Uh, but the chances and the opportunities that it's given me to be more empathetic to others, and it's funny for a person who was in full-time ministry for 30 years to say that they needed empathy. It's maybe not funny, it might be sad to some people, but I really needed in ministry. Didn't mean I was perfect in every area of my life. And I really needed that, I think. And then the ability to pay things forward to people who, I mentioned this to you, I'm going to owe people prayers and dinners and meals and transportation for the rest of my life because of what people did and came alongside me. And then I told you that my wife 3 or 4 months ago was diagnosed with breast cancer. So we went through 2 of those surgeries in order to get clear margins. And so we, again, had people praying, had people bringing food, had people offering to take us places. And so that's the biggest change in my life, is just to be able to empathize with other people that are dealing with things that I might not have, I don't want to say cared about, but didn't touch me like it does now. But also the ability to reach out to others and offer whatever kind of help. Katie said service, whatever kind of service that I can offer. I want to be able to do that. And that's important to me. And I think we're all called to do that. We're all called to make the people in our lives, make it better for them. And if we have the ability to make it better for a community or a state or a nation, obviously we can do that, like you're doing with A Cure in Sight.
Well, thank you, Reagan. And I would venture to guess that all three of you, as a result of the varying different levels of service and meaning that you've found through, through your spiritual connection, through the way that you practice and live your life, I would venture to say that you found a lot of meaning and a lot of purpose and a lot of, I guess, just I would say peace, maybe on some level, of just feeling like you're here and you're doing what you feel called to do, what you feel meant to do, and and that you're willing to continue on that path, despite the obstacles that may continue to come up, because you understand that they will keep coming up. So as we end, each of you, do you have anything that you'd like to say in closing, just briefly? I guess we'll start with Rabbi.
There's something I didn't say earlier that I do, that is also part of my practice and my awareness. And it, although it comes out of religious texts, and I could probably give a sermon about it, it's the realization that every time I inhale, I am taking in whatever it is that I understand to be the holiness, the wholeness, the integrity of the world. And every time I breathe out, I'm putting that back into the world. It's a way of viewing life as this continual interaction with, whether we have a name for it like God, whether we have a sense of it like nature, whatever it is, we are in continual interaction with it as long as we live. So this too is part of how I think about existence and my place in existence, that as long as I'm breathing, I am part of all of this. And the sun is shining. And it's Louisville, Kentucky in January, and it's going to be 57 degrees today, which is wacky but glorious.
I love it. Love it. Well, thank you again. And thank you for sharing one of your little wow moments with us right here. That was great. I hope the warm weather continues, or continues frequently.
It's supposed to go down to 18 later this week.
Yeah.
Appreciate it while it's happening.
Yes.
That's the lesson I'm going to leave with, and I'm going to mute now.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with
while
us.
it's happening.
All right, Katie, what about you? Do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I usually talk a lot about eudaimonia, and I haven't said a word about it, but that was a term that I learned in my PhD program, and it is about developing your skills and your talents, and doing that in a way that you can be of service to others. And I think that I really learned through this diagnosis, which has been a really weird gift in a lot of ways, that I have a responsibility to be the best person that I can be. And I know that the skill that I don't even know if this is a skill. I was blessed with the ability to just love people regardless. And so that's something that I just really want to continue to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie, for being here with us. Reagan, what about you? Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Well, I'd like to say to Katie that being able to love people is a huge blessing. I wasn't always able to do that, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge. But like I said, this that I've been through has allowed me the opportunity to maybe be a little bit more loving and caring. With regard to spirituality, which is what we were talking about, my faith is the most important thing. And we talked about doctors, and we talked about scientists and things being created, and I believe that God put those people in place to work with us, and we trust our lives to them in a lot of ways. But in my faith, I believe that God is in control of what's going on in my life. I believe that, and even though I fear, I know that He tells me not to. And even though I'm weak and don't have courage, sometimes He tells me that I need to be strong and courageous. And the number one thing, Danae, is that I know that ultimately I will be healed of every sickness, of every disease, uh, when I end up in eternity. So it's going to be a little hard down here, and it's inconvenient, and I don't like having a pump for diabetes, and I don't like having to have scans. But I believe that ultimately God will heal me and of any disease or any sickness or any emotional problems that I have, and I'm looking forward to that.
I love that. Thank you so much, all of you. This has been, I think, like Rabbi said in the chat, this has been just very inspiring. So I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to you guys. Thank you so much for being here and for taking your time and for honoring us with your stories and your insights. We're so grateful for you.